So if you could just start by just saying your name and introducing yourself.
Okay. I'm Jenny Chapman, and I'm allegedly the world's loudest snorer. Or Britain's loudest snorer, sorry. I gave myself promotion at that point.
That would be quite the title.
Sorry about that.
No, that's absolutely fine. That's perfect. So we'll just start. So how did you find out that you were, in fact, Britain's loudest snorer?
I went to a Help Stop Snoring clinic that was advertised in one of the national papers. They wanted people to volunteer who snored loudly. My husband suggested I wrote and tried to get in on it. And I went there with 5 other people, had a weekend in a hotel. And they measured us all, and I came out top of the pops, basically.
That's pretty amazing.
Yes.
So obviously you mentioned your husband there. How has your snoring affected that relationship?
Well, I mean, the relationship's fine, but it obviously affects a night's sleep, mainly for Colin, my husband, because I sleep the majority of the time through my snoring, and unfortunately he can't, because as it was measured at the snoring clinic at 111 decibels, which is like a jet engine, it sometimes gets very noisy.
So what are some of the things that you have to put in place in order to cope with that? I mean, do you still share a bedroom, or?
Yeah, we do. We normally start off together, and but in the morning, the chances are that one of us will probably be in one of the spare rooms. Either I move because he's kicked me a couple of times and I'm fed up with being kicked, or he's kicked me and I haven't woken up, so he moves. But it works fine. It's not sort of, we don't scream and shout at each other about it. I think it's just after so many years, it's acknowledged that I'm quite a loud snorer.
So what are some of the other snoring aids or techniques that you've tried? You mentioned kicking.
Yeah, kicking's not really recommended as a snoring aid.
Beyond that, what are some of the things?
Beyond that,
I've
tried no end of things, because I've obviously been through various bits and pieces, but I've tried the nose strips like footballers wear, which I have to say useless, and I've had nasal sprays, I've had throat sprays, I've had things that you put over your bottom teeth, like I think they're called mandibular things, they're jaws for the bottom jaw to make it come out, protrude out. I don't think they're very special, and they're not particularly nice to sleep in. You feel like a rugby player. And I've had a strap thing that goes round your chin and round your forehead, and that was a bit like a gimp mask, and that wasn't the best thing in the world. The thing that I've had most success with, I have to say, is a product that's a tiny little thing that you put into your nostrils to open up your airways, which is something that's recommended, and it's called Mute, M-U-T-E, like quiet, obviously, switch the sound off. It was started off for Chris Froome, the cyclist, to help his cycling to open the airways, get more air for him, and they decided that they could sort of move it on a bit and use it as a snoring aid.
That's brilliant. So that's something that's actually worked for you?
It has. It hasn't stopped me. I'm not going to ever say it stopped me, because that wouldn't be true, but it has reduced the volume. I keep quoting this, but my husband said it gone from a lion's roar to a cat's purr.
That's great. So some questions for you, Patrick. So you're actually a breathing expert, is that correct?
I don't use that title, Alice, but I've worked in the field of breathing for almost 20 years, and I came across it originally because I had problems myself with sleep and with asthma and with nasal congestion. And I learned of the work of a Russian doctor back in the 1970s. He discovered 2 things, and he said, breathe through your nose, and he said, breathe lightly. So at the time, I was a chronic mouth breather all the way through my teenage years into my early 20s, and nobody had ever told me to breathe through my nose. My nose was stuffy, so I used this exercise to help open up my nose, which is simply holding the breath. Because if you take a breath in through your nose, a breath out through your nose, you pinch your nose, and if you kind of sway or move your body and keep holding your breath until you feel a stronger air hunger, when you let go, you breathe through your nose. That will open up your nose, so it'll decongest the nose. So then I established nasal breathing, and it made a huge difference to me. Most of my work is internationally. I've written 8 books. Some of my books have gone into 10 languages, and I've been published in 4 medical papers in terms of looking at, the last 2 papers were looking at mouth breathing in asthmatic children, and they looked at both their asthma and their sleep. And Alice, it's very simple stuff, you know. If we look at statistics, 50% of children are going around with their mouths open, and very few people are telling them anything else. We don't know the figure for adults because it never gets studied, but any adult who sleeps with a mouth, if they have their mouth open during sleep, and if they wake up with a dry mouth in the morning, they're not having a good night's sleep. And, you know, even if you were to look at just the statistics for hay fever here in the UK is about 30% of the population. If you've got nasal congestion, you're twice as likely to have sleep problems. So if you've got a stuffy nose, your sleep is affected, your concentration is affected, your productivity is affected, but also your stress levels are affected. Because it's not easy to remain calm if you're feeling tired. And I think, you know, most people with children will appreciate that. If a child hasn't had a good night's sleep, the child can be very cranky in the morning. Well, we are the same.
So you mentioned there that breathing through your nose is extremely important.
It's huge, yes.
What are some of the reasons that breathing through your mouth are actually so bad for you?
Well, if you breathe through your nose, it slows down your breathing, and that has a calming effect. Breathing through the nose also regulates volume so that you breathe lighter. And when you breathe lighter and through your nose, you're going to have less turbulence in the upper airways. Conversely, if you breathe through an open mouth, it's almost that it's sucking moisture out of the upper airways, so the throat goes dry, the mouth is dry, and the airways become sticky, and they also become inflamed. So when the airways become more narrow, as you're breathing through more narrow airways, there's greater turbulence, there's greater snoring, and also there's greater risk of obstructive sleep apnea. So, you know, even by having the mouth open, it reduces airway space. And the one thing, you know, in terms of addressing snoring, we would say is open up your airway and bring down your breathing volume. And the 2 things that we use, these are also advocated by the NHS website. I went in on it this morning and I looked at what are the recommendations there. They said 1, use a nasal dilator. The one that we use is Mute Snoring. Number 2 is close your mouth and breathe through your nose. And I have a book just by that very title, Close Your Mouth, advocating the importance of breathing through your nose for helping with sleep. And number 3, they said don't sleep on your back. And I think anybody, you know, who can advocate those 3 simple principles. And the nasal dilator is a very interesting one. It's based on what's called the Cottle manoeuvre. And you can try it for yourself there. You just put one finger either side of your nostrils and just gently prise your cheeks apart so that it opens up the airway space, and you'll feel it easier to breathe through. Like, the rule of thumb is, if you can open up the airway, you're going to reduce the turbulence within the airway. And that's why we use nasal dilators, we use Mute. But also, if I just say to somebody, use a nasal dilator, but we also have to be conscious that they actually breathe through their nose. There's no point in using a nasal dilator if you have your mouth open. So in doing that, we give breathing exercises, and we also use paper tape across the lips. And it's just paper tape that's bought in chemists, you know, that we advocate putting a little piece of paper tape across the lips, keep the lips together, breathe through your nose and breathe lightly, and that will make a big difference to your sleep.
That's fantastic. I'm slightly taking mental notes here because my partner does every so often snore, which disturbs my sleep. So I'll be taking some tips home with me.
Well, the next time you see him snoring, roll over and check, does he have his mouth open? You'll know by the sound of it. A mouth snoring goes something like this. And a nose snoring goes something like this. So there's a difference in sound, and even by listening, you might be able to pick up where is it coming from. If it's coming through his nose, you better get Mute and have him put it into his nostrils. And if it's coming through his mouth, tape him up.
That's great. I'll tell him that a medical professional recommended these techniques to me, so he doesn't look at me like I'm absolutely mad. Where can our listeners go for a little bit of information?
Sure. There's websites with information. One is called mutesnoring.com. And also the Mute product can be bought in Boots chemists pretty much throughout the country. I think it costs about £15 or so. And for breathing, it's buteikoclinic.com. So there's lots of resources there, lots of information, help both you and your partner get a good night's sleep.
That's fantastic. Jenny and Patrick, thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Alice.
All
you,
right,
Alice.
take
Bye-bye.
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.